All right, everyone, welcome to the TeachFX live office hours session. This is one in a series of office hours that we offer around monthly. And today's theme is personalized professional learning for principals and emerging leaders. Our very special guest today is Dr. Amanda Conley, who's principal of Middletown High School in the Appoquinimink School District. Amanda, it'd be wonderful if you could give us a brief introduction. We're going to learn a lot more about Amanda as the day goes along, but tell us a little bit about your career and how you've gotten to the point where you're a first-year principal.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Conley. I am, as David said, principal here at Middletown High School in the Appoquinimink School District, Middletown, Delaware, and it is my first year as principal. Prior to this, I was an assistant principal for 5 years in another high school in the district. And previous to that, I was a social studies teacher, teacher leader, coach, and club moderator. So I've been in education 15 years in mix of private and public schools. And I'm excited to talk to you today about my work with TeachFX and the support David and his colleagues at TeachFX have provided for me.
All right, thank you so much. And before I introduce myself, I just wanted to ask if it's possible for you to turn on your camera. We'd love for you to do that. It's nice when we can see your face. Also, you'll see later on that we're interested in some dialogue with all of you. So I'm David Brazier. I am the Director of Professional Learning at TeachFX. And in my career, I've been a middle school and high school teacher, a high school assistant principal and principal, and a university professor preparing folks who aspire to become assistant principals and principals. The last 4 years, I've been working with TeachFX, and I am absolutely thrilled with the work that we've done to try to promote equitable student discourse in the classroom and to help teachers understand what their discourse looks like so that they can make improvements. Before we get into our dialogue with Amanda, we wanted to tell you some things about TeachFX, since you may not be familiar with us. Our mission is to promote more meaningful and equitable student voice, as I was indicating. And the way we try to do that is by empowering teachers to make positive change in their classrooms by looking at classroom process data. And we also support teachers through professional development workshops that help develop ideas for teachers to use in the classroom and how to look at the results. We do this because we have 3 main points to our mission. The first is student voice. We know that students have to speak up in the classroom in order to be engaged and to maximize their learning. And we also are on this mission because we firmly believe in equity. The challenge in many classrooms is that special populations are often silent for a variety of reasons. And yet it is the special populations who would benefit the most from being able to speak up in class, as research has shown. So we're really all about trying to open that door for wider and more meaningful participation. And then the last reason has to do with feedback. We all need feedback in order to improve. We need another set of eyes. And at TeachFX, we're able to provide an objective data display that gives teachers the kind of feedback that can be extremely useful to them. So TeachFX is really very simple to use. It can be implemented on an iPhone, a tablet, or a laptop. And all you do is press the start button and press the stop button. And once you've completed that, within an hour or so, you receive a class report that shows you what the dynamics in your classroom look like. Now, if you're interested in a free trial, you can take a moment and focus your smartphone on that QR code that displays on the slide. There's also another one in the last set of slides, which we'll distribute after today's conversation. So what does it look like? Well, the class report that's generated from recordings presents many, many different displays. And this is just one that focuses on whether or not the teacher provided opportunities to build on what students contributed to the dialogue. And you see those upside down triangles, they point to all the places where there was some building on what students had contributed previously. As I mentioned before, we offer a wide variety of professional learning to support teachers fostering student discourse in the classroom. One set of professional learning sessions focuses directly on student discourse. Others have to do with whole student learning and equity. And there's many, many more. But our philosophy is that what we want to do is to help teachers understand how to make things work in the classroom and then look at the results of their efforts. What we find over time is that the more teachers record and do some analysis of their recordings, trying particular teaching techniques, the more student talk comes out. So as you can see that with between 1 and 5 recordings, there's a lot of growth in individual student talk, which is denoted by light blue in our app. And teachers who are avid users of TeachFX really show tremendous growth over time. So that's a little bit about who we are. Now we want to learn a little bit more about you. So we have these reflection questions on the screen. And I'd like you to take a moment to read them. And we would love to hear your responses and or see your responses in the chat. And I'll just be quiet until we hear from one of you. And Rachel, I'm going to ask you to monitor the chat for me, so it'll be fine for you to present any questions that might come up.
I can do that.
Now, I understand we have someone in the car who can't safely read the questions. I'm going to read them out loud. If principals in your district could do, sorry, I got to move my pictures around. If principals in your district could do one thing to help teachers grow and develop more effectively, what would it be? What role does feedback play in the principal-teacher relationship? And the third question is, how do you design leadership development for your administrators and emerging leaders? So you can pick any one of those questions. We don't have to take them in order. And we'd really like to hear from 1 or 2 or 3 of you.
I'll go ahead and answer. So I think with regard to what could principals do differently in the district, right now, coming out of the pandemic, I think we're seeing a lot of apathy, unfortunately, among teachers as well as students and parents. I'd like to see our administrators in the district challenging our teachers to go back and rethink their why. Why are you here? Why did you choose this path? Why are you working with students? And challenge them to, look to rejuvenate over the summer, restore, and come back, for next school year with maybe a new why. Because I keep hearing, from different sources, well, everyone's been through so much, and yes, that is true. But at some point, we need accountability and responsibility, and really, like I said, challenge our teachers to, help our students be successful and move forward.
One of the things about classroom dynamics that we notice is that teachers often feel the need to mediate whatever is said in the classroom. And so that builds in a habit of expecting whoever's leading a session like this to intervene after each person speaks. I don't want to do that. So if anyone would like to respond to Ashley or bring up a new point, please go ahead.
There are some great points in the chat right now. Ernesto said to improve and strengthen communication and connections. And Dr. Wilson says, as a principal, she focuses on building instructional capacity because too often we get distracted with the latest and greatest, but there's a need for strengthening sound and fundamental instructional practices, which is very on point for this conversation. Teachers cause learning, I love that. And Sakena said, direct support, including regular feedback. Feedback plays a big role in the principal-teacher relationship. It helps with development as well as keeps an open line of communication, which is also so on point for this conversation. And there's more coming through. Thank you, Adam and Blair. So Adam says when he was a principal, he found that consistently going into the classroom helps teachers, and it's important to give timely feedback. And that's definitely something I think we've heard and seen. Of course, it starts to get difficult when you can't be in every classroom every day, right? Or as frequently as you'd like to be. And then Blair says principals are instructional leaders. So feedback can help develop teachers' instructional practices and the culture of high quality instruction in the building. Yes, I love that phrase, building instructional capacity. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Those are wonderful responses. And we're actually going to return to these questions at the end and see if there's new ideas or new ways of thinking. So let's get to Amanda. I'd like you to start out, Amanda, by telling us about Middletown High School. What's it like to work there?
Awesome. So David, thanks for this opportunity. I'm excited to dialogue with you all about my life as a first-year principal. It's been fun. So Middletown High School is about 1,600 students in Middletown, Delaware, Appoquinimink School District. And Appoquinimink School District is one of the fastest growing school districts in the state. So we have a lot of growth, opening new schools and lots of opportunities for staff at Middletown. When I think about the culture here at Middletown High School, so Middletown has been in existence. We're about to graduate our 110th graduating class. So we've been around for a little bit. We have a very veteran staff, and we are, I think we like to think of ourselves as, progressive in terms of thinking about instruction and student achievement and student experience. We have an awesome course catalog. We have 25 pathways, 26 AP course offerings. We have dual enrollment course offerings. And so we have lots of experiences for students. We're a diverse high school and a comprehensive ninth grade through 12th grade. So we're a public high school. We're not a magnet school or a charter school or anything like that. I hope that gives you kind of a perspective of what Middletown High School is like specifically.
Amanda, can you give us a short thumbnail of the demographics of the student body? Things like, what's the proportion of students on free and reduced price lunch? What does the ethnic breakdown look like? Students with disabilities, that kind of thing.
Yep. So when we look at our, and I see some of my APPO people out there, so Ashley, you could probably answer some of our students with disabilities questions, but we have a very diverse student body. So we're when we look at the breakdown of students, we're about 40% African-American students. We have a low population of English language learners, but our population is growing. And so that's a unique challenge that we're facing. How do we support our EL students? And we have, students with IEPs. We have some specialized programs here for students 18 to 21 years old with specific learning challenges. So it's a diverse student population, which we think makes our school great.
And last question, how long have you been working with TeachFX?
So this is my first year working with TeachFX. I was introduced to it last spring as a potential instructional tool when I was at Appoquinimink High School as an assistant principal. And when I became principal here at Middletown, it was something that I definitely latched onto as both a tool to bring to my teachers and then also for a professional learning tool for me. So this has been my first full year using TeachFX.
Great, thank you. So again, for our person in the car, if you don't mind, I'm going to read the slide. But from the perspective of a first-year principal, what we'd like to talk about is what's the Middletown High School vision and how does that drive specific goals for the school? What's the hardest or most surprising aspect of establishing yourself in your role as a new principal? And what kinds of support have been most helpful to you as a first-year principal? Now, I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all see each other and talk to each other. But Amanda, if you need the slides again, just let me know.
So I'm going to tell you about our instructional goal. And David, you can prompt me if I forget to answer one of the questions. You have the slides, I believe. So yes. One of the things I think that I love about our district in Middletown High School is in terms of instructional goals. I've got a nice playbook that I can choose from. And so our vision for Middletown is that when students leave Middletown High School, they're ready to be productive global citizens in our society. And when we think about our instructional focus, I want to orient, if you're not from our school district, we have, I'm going to show it to you, but I can share the link if anyone's interested. So we have what we call our principles of instruction. And these are our, it's a common language that our district uses around instruction. And so this is specific to our secondary schools. And these are high leverage strategies that we believe are going to, and research has shown is going to improve student achievement. So for this year, our instructional focus is around student discourse and feedback. And how are we planning intentionally for student discourse? And then what type of feedback are we providing for students? And then through our work this year with TeachFX, we're also, as an instructional team for next year, planning to continue with student discourse as an instructional focus, and then also look around student clarity and our students clear on the learning goals and the learning intentions in our classroom. So we are all committed here at Middletown to really focusing on student discourse. How's it planned for? How do students collaborate around discourse in the classroom and the equity that provides for our kids?
Now, one thing I noticed, Amanda, when I moved from being assistant principal to principal in the same school, which is a little different from your experience, somehow the world looked completely different. Mm-hmm. So tell us about some of the surprising or difficult kinds of challenges you faced making that move.
So I would agree with you that suddenly the world looks very different. So I was assistant principal across town at one of our sister high schools, but in our district, the schools all work very closely together. So I knew the Middletown team before I came here. I knew the culture of the team. And I think I might have been a little naive in the shift from assistant principal to principal and what that world looked like. I think one of the things that has surprised me the most is, as an assistant principal, I felt like I was a very good assistant principal, and I was able to manage instruction and support for teachers with the management of the building, the organizational management of the building. And as the principal, I have to be so intentional every day about instruction. And I am the instructional leader of the school, and I have to be cognizant that every interaction I have with staff, I have to find a way to talk about quality instruction for our kids, because I need to show that that's what's important. And I think that's something that I'm working on this year, and it's been helpful to have that as a goal. And I think those of you who are principals on here, the other surprising piece, again, you think you understand what's going to feel like, but the first time you stand at your steps, like during a fire drill, that's not a drill, the fire alarm's going off and 1,700 kids are walking down the steps and everyone's looking at you. And then they all get out of the building safely and you stand there and you're like, I guess I should go see where the fire is. Like, I'm in charge. So like that moment of, okay, I have 1,700 kids and 150 staff members. I guess I'll go look for the fire. That's another shift as a first-year principal.
It's wonderful. Thank you. And we had a great comment from Dr. Wilson about being, I think you said naive. We're all naive until we get into the chair. That's for sure. And I think it's a humbling thought, but it's also good to remember. So last point on this part, Amanda, what kinds of support have you found most helpful to you as a first-year principal?
So when I think about one of the things I have noticed about myself as a leader is I crave feedback. And so as a leader, I want to know where I stand with the people that I lead, with the people who are leading me. And I am someone who seeks out feedback, and I think I can take feedback pretty well because it's something that I want. And so as an assistant principal, I had my direct supervisor right there to give me lots of real-time feedback. And in this role, I don't have that. Obviously I have a super supportive district office, but they're not with me every day. So when I think about the types of support I need, one of the things is to know what supports I do have in the district, who are the resources I can use as thought partners, and who are the resources in our district that are going to give me support or candid feedback. I think the other support I needed, and I'm lucky that I have it in our district, is we have a very clear framework of what good instruction looks like and how we can support our teachers with that. So I think the fact that I have this toolkit of instructional practices and resources, and I have, a direct supervisor who is out there in the education space pulling in all the possible resources we can have. It's almost like he gives me a menu of, hey, here are all the tools I have found. Now, which ones do you want to use to lead your school? And so that's how the TeachFX partnership began.
I want to take a pause and see if anyone has questions. I know there's been some chatting, but it's hard for me to look at the chat and look at Amanda at the same time. So was there anyone who'd like to speak up or anything we'd like to feature out of the chat? All right, well, you talked about feedback, Amanda, and I agree. I think that principals are starved for feedback because there are lots and lots of reasons why they don't get it, or the kind that they get is not always useful. But let's take this into thinking about teacher feedback. I'd like you to reflect with us on the challenges of giving candid and compassionate feedback to teachers, and that's a phrase that's specifically used in Appoquinimink, candid and compassionate. And how has teacher feedback fit into pursuing your vision and instructional goals? And then the last question in this segment is, why does teacher feedback matter so much, especially right now?
Okay, so when I think about the challenges of giving candid and compassionate feedback, and those two things have to be together, the challenges are just how uncomfortable it can be until it's a norm in your organization. And so when we think about candid and compassionate feedback, I think the most important thing to note is that, education, being in the education space is urgent work. And when we have urgent work to do, we can't be in a culture of just being nice. Being nice feels really good, but how do we actually move work when we're just being nice? And so we have a commitment to our students to move work forward. And we can do that with being compassionate and kind. But to me, being candid is a responsibility we have to those that we lead. And so when I think about the challenges, it's making sure you have spent the time to build relationships, that you have the tactical professional knowledge to give good candid feedback and tools and resources, and that you're not mean-spirited, that you're always giving teachers feedback in a way that is praising them when you see excellence or you see risk-taking, and then giving them some constructive action or professional dialogue with the teacher when you want to give them, action steps. And I think I liken it to, athletic coaching. I was a coach for years, and as a teacher, I'm going to lead you. I'm going to love on you. I'm going to give you all the resources I possibly can, but I'm going to hold you to a high standard.
Well, listening to you, I'm remembering how challenging it was to give teachers feedback, particularly if it wasn't of a happy sort. And how I observed in colleagues and in myself that there was a strong tendency to use euphemisms. And when you sugarcoat the message, then a lot of times the message doesn't get through. So that's definitely a tricky balance. I'd like to know more about, you talked before about the school vision and your goals and so on. So how does feedback work in terms of forwarding the vision and helping you move toward instructional goals?
So I can speak specifically to my school and in our system. We have a culture here where we provide teachers with feedback at least once a week. And so we have a commitment on within our leadership team here at Middletown to be in classrooms of those we lead at least once a week. So we're there, and it's non-evaluative. We're there 5 to 10, maybe 15 minutes. And we're looking for what instructional practices do we see while we're there. And so we know you're not going to see all of our instructional practices in one moment. But when we are in a classroom, how do the strategies that the teachers are using align with our focus for our school, which is increasing student discourse, planned collaboration, and giving students feedback. And then we're giving feedback on those specific instructional practices. And so we're looking for, what is the teacher doing? What are the students doing? how does that align to the vision we have for Middletown? And then if there is, we're always looking for where we can either praise excellence or risk taking in a classroom. We always find something we can praise, and we're specific to praise those two things. And then whether it's giving then the teachers corrective action in real time or some type of professional dialogue where we're asking a question, we do that, but we're very intentional, don't ask a question you already know an answer to, because that just is yucky. If you already know the answer, don't ask them the question. Just tell them, like, I saw you made this choice in your lesson, and here is how I think you could do this differently. And here's a resource to help you do that. And so, getting into classrooms once a week, is still not enough, but right now that's where we are. And then that's why we love, TeachFX as a resource, because then our teachers can engage in this reflection even when their supervisor isn't present in the classroom.
Now, you just put your finger on something that helped me to negotiate that euphemisms versus candid feedback piece, which is going to the facts, just to state straight out, this is what I saw, and waiting for a response. So one thing I didn't mention about the TeachFX tool is that the data comes back only to the teacher. It's entirely private to the teacher, unless she decides that she wants to explicitly share it with someone. So can you say more about how you see TeachFX fitting into feedback and instructional goals?
Absolutely. So TeachFX is right now, it's a resource that we have for our teaching staff. It's completely voluntary, and one of our instructional coaches, Devin Jacob, is our instructional coach here at Middletown. I see her on the call. She's driving. Hi, Devin. And so as a tool, one of the reasons we like TeachFX is because it's a tool, right? So it's not the end all and be all right now of professional learning at Middletown High School, but is one tool that our teachers have access to. And so with student discourse, we're saying to our instructors, how are we intentionally planning for students to talk in our classrooms? We know that when students are talking more, they're learning. And we can give you that feedback when I'm in the room, but when I'm not in the room, hey, turn on TeachFX and you'll get your class reports. They're for you, that I can't log in. There has been a misconception that like I could see them, and I can. If you share it with me, I have a reflection protocol we're going to use together, shoulder to shoulder. But just for you as the professional to have a tool that you can use to record and then reflect on your practice. When I was in the classroom, I think if I knew this existed and I didn't have it as a tool, I would have been saying like to my school, like, hello, this is a tool and it could help me be a better professional. You need to find a way to get this for me as a teacher. And so I'm happy to be able to provide this resource to my teachers.
And another question that I have is are there things about the current context of education in Appoquinimink that make feedback particularly important? I think some of this started to come out in the earlier discussion.
Well, I think one of the things right now for feedback, I think feedback is always important, but one of the things we are also using it for right now is to build a positive culture here at Middletown. As you know, educators as a whole right now, I think are getting beaten up unfairly by society, and feedback to say to a teacher, you're doing an amazing job. I was in your classroom today and all of your students were engaged, or I was in your classroom today and the way that your students were able to express the learning intention. So to use feedback also as a way to build our educators back up who have shifted from in-person learning to virtual learning, now back to in-person learning, and using feedback that way as well is extremely important because, as a high school administrator, I see a lot that teaching is an isolating profession and they're only normally getting feedback from high school students. And so to be able to get feedback either from their peers, we have a walkthrough process for their peer walkthroughs, to get walkthroughs or to get feedback from their administrators or to get their own reflective feedback is, I think, invaluable for our teachers, especially right now.
You just made a point that I like to make with teachers about TeachFX class reports, because when we hear feedback, that can sound like a euphemism for you're going to tell me what I did wrong. And instead, what we try to encourage is to look for what you did right in the class report. There's a lot that went right. Let's start there. And that was also my personal philosophy as a principal, that when I was giving feedback to teachers, and I know you do this too, I always wanted to start with what worked well. And there's a lot in the class reports that you can see in blue, red, dark blue, what went well. I'll take another pause to see if there are questions or responses to anything you've heard.
I have a question. Amanda, can you talk more about the reflection protocol you all use, and if you have kind of goals around the data you're looking at when you meet with teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is our first year using TeachFX. And so one of the things is we've wanted to be very sensitive that teachers felt like it was voluntary and that, again, it was non-evaluative at all. And so we have a form that one of our other sister schools created. It's on a Google form where it talks about either growth of their class reports, if they've noticed any trends or changes in their class reports, or if they've noticed any opportunities, like what does the data tell them? So it's a Google form that teachers can fill out. And Devin, as an instructional coach, will meet with teachers one-on-one to review it. My goal is that our culture can get to a place in our building where TeachFX is something that I can, as their principal, sit down shoulder to shoulder with teachers and really review class reports and dive into that. But right now I'm trying to be super sensitive that it's just a tool, it's reflection, it's non-evaluative. So I have not personally, as their principal, sat down with teachers to engage in those reflections. We've leveraged Devin as a coach to coach teachers through the reflection reports. But I'd be happy to connect with you after the meeting. I can share with you a copy of our reflection tool and how we've used it.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. So in addition to having teachers feel comfortable sharing with you and Devin and other administrators, our big hope is that teachers will make the classroom data that's provided uniquely by TeachFX a big part of their PLC discussions, so that they're really focused on the process of how they got to student outcomes as a way of being able to change those outcomes more effectively when you have a clear sense of what's been going on in the classroom. To put it very plainly, that are you learning from students what they're learning? And the only way you're going to learn that in the moment is through what they say. Any other questions or responses? I'm trying to use my Zoom wait time, which is about 3 times as long as my in-person wait time. Well, Amanda, I can't wait any longer. So I want to ask you, one of the services that we have started providing from TeachFX is leadership development. And you were part of 3 schools in Appoquinimink who participated this year in our instructional leadership series. I wonder if you could tell our group here a little bit about that and any reflections that you have having gone through the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me think back through. I feel like there was a progression over the course of the school year. So as a first year principal, I think I was just getting invites on my calendar, and I just showed up where Miss Greeny, one of our secretaries, told me I needed to be. And so I am sure that the first TeachFX leadership session, I do vividly remember showing up and being like, okay, what is this? And then a few minutes in realizing, oh, okay, I think this is leadership specific, or this is PD specifically for me. I'm not leading my teachers through a PD session. Okay, cool. I can engage in this. Let me focus. And so there was a progression there where I realized what was going on, but I loved it. And so the program of study that we went through was, I think, 5 sessions, David, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 to 5
Yes.
sessions. And we engaged in professional learning as a group of instructional leaders about how we could refine our practice, how we could improve our practice. And so David led us through, essentially we did 3 scenarios where we talked about instructional leadership. We role played some scenarios David had written for us. And, we each played different roles on an instructional team with real data that we had to go through and talk about how we were going to lead instruction in these fictitious, case study schools that we were given. And we were given readings in between each session. And I have to say, it was one of the most impactful experiences I had this year in terms of my own growth as a leader. So, my team this year, we're obviously new working together. And so it was awesome that every 5 to 6 weeks, we had 3 hours on the calendar where we were committed to coming together as a team and talking about our instructional leadership. And then that primed me to come back to my team during our Monday and Friday morning leadership meetings and continue the conversation about instruction. So it was a nice springboard into being an instructional leader of my leadership team. I have 4 assistant principals, a dean of students, and an instructional coach that I lead. And so it set me up for success in terms of leading conversations about instruction at Middletown.
Well, it's wonderful to hear. I know it's in the crush of things, it's hard to remember some of the details. So all I'll add is that before we did the case studies, we also spent a lot of time. And by the way, I need to mention that this was team taught with Amanda's assistant superintendent, Dr. TJ Very. So I had a wonderful time planning with him so that it was specific for the Appoquinimink schools. But we spent our first 3 sessions really focused on understanding what instructional leadership is, how principals, assistant principals, coaches can expand their leadership capacity as they expand their knowledge of content and pedagogy, so that they're very well prepared to interact with teachers, giving feedback like what we talked about, but also structuring their schools to improve instruction over time. So that was a lot of fun. And I'm glad, Amanda, to know that it mattered to you.
It did matter. I'm not going to lie. The first time we had it on our calendar, I was like, what is this? We have another meeting. But then over the course, it only took about 15 minutes, David, of the first session. I was like, okay, I'll engage in this. This is good stuff.
Well, I'm glad. I won't comment on how my students reacted sometimes. Anyway, so as we come toward the latter part of our session today, what would you say to a principal or superintendent wondering how best to support teachers?
Do you want me to answer that? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what would I say to a principal or superintendent wondering how to support teachers? For me, it's clarity around, like, as either the superintendent or the principal needs to support teachers by being very clear about what we expect. And for us, we expect our students to achieve. And so I need to give you the toolkit to make sure you know how that can happen. So what can I do to support you to increase student achievement? And being an instructional leader means knowing what is good for students, what tools are out there, what does the research say about how students achieve in our school. So when I think about what I would say to a principal or superintendent, it's you support teachers by being clear in your expectations and giving them candid feedback about where they are, and then giving them the resources to teach our students.
I think for Appoquinimink, one of the really important resources that I've seen is your principles of instruction, which you referenced before when you talked about the goals for Middletown High School. And I think what our audience should know is that these 10 principles of instruction were collaboratively developed by principals and I think others as well, maybe some of your curriculum specialists in the school district. And so it's like they've created their own language and understanding around what good instruction looks like. And now there's a document that makes that understanding common for anyone who's working there. I personally, as a person coming from the outside and working with teachers and administrators in Appoquinimink, I find that document to be enormously helpful because it focuses our attention in areas that are important. It's not perfect. I've actually been in professional learning sessions where we talked about, well, this doesn't make sense, but it gives you a place to start from. And it gives you the communication of what the expectations are. And then I think people know where to go from there.
I think it's important that we have a common language. And so when I'm speaking to our teachers, I was at Appo High, and then I come here to Middletown High 3-4 miles away, but I'm able to talk about responsive instruction and student discourse and student clarity. And a social studies teacher at Appo High or Middletown High or Odessa High know what I'm talking about and what the expectations are. And as a teacher, you have a guide that you can pull out and say, you know, here is, when we talk about student discourse, this is what developing practice looks like. This is what it looks like if it's done effectively. And this is the best practice for student discourse. And then as the supervisor giving feedback, I can give them very candid feedback because there's clear language around it that is not judgmental. It's just, this is what that practice looks like in a classroom.
Amanda, that document, we're seeing like one corner of it. You want to just hold it up for a second?
So I have piles of these in my office, and I think it's just fun because I just like flash them around whenever I'm talking to somebody. I'm like, here, this is what instruction looks like in Appo. But it's a document that all of our teachers have. Again, there's piles of them around the admin office, and it talks about what are our principles of instruction, and then what they look like, and then kind of ratings for them, and definitions and examples. And again, it's a working document. Every year, every summer, we kind of come back to the table with feedback from our teachers, and our it's the instructional principles review committee gets back and tweaks language. And so it's, again, I think David alluded to it, it's not perfect, but it's a working document that we're pretty proud of here in Appo.
And it's a great quick reference, that's for sure. And
it's a toolkit for a first-year principal. I think there's so much out there around instruction for me to ground myself in, okay, these are the things I know matter.
Pick up your toys.
Jaws.
We have some things going on there. All right, so now we come back to those reflection questions that we saw in the beginning. Again, for our people in cars, I'm going to just read these again. If principals in your district could do one thing, these are questions now for our audience to respond to again. If principals in your district could do one thing to help teachers grow and develop more effectively, what would it be? What role does feedback play in the principal-teacher relationship? And how do you design leadership development for your administrators and emerging leaders? That last question, I'm reading it differently now after I've looked at it for a couple of days. You could think of it hypothetically, like how would you design leadership development? Or you could also think of that last question specifically, how is leadership development designed for your administrators and emerging leaders? So I'm just going to open it up. Who would like to respond? And I'm not afraid to pick someone at this point because we all know each other now. All right, so Kenna, you were the first one to log in today, so I'm going to pick you. Do you have any response you'd like to share with us? Maybe not. How about Karina? I think you were number 2. I love Zoom. Karina moved from unmuted to muted, which I think was a message. No, not going to respond. That's okay.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I meant to unmute. I didn't realize I was not muted. I was asking if you could pop up the questions again. That would be great.
Certainly. I'll just leave them up.
Yeah, and I think we basically covered, you know, the takeaways for me were providing prompt feedback and clarity. Oh, are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, you just muted yourself in the middle of clarity.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on with my computer, but yeah, just I think that's something that we know is needed, but it's pretty rare to find, especially in an instructional leader. So I think that would be my 2 points that I would surface.
Karina, I meant to ask people to do this in the beginning, but could you tell us what your current job is?
Sure. I'm an instructional coach for Fresno Unified School District, and I am applying for a vice principal position next year. So very excited. And I could totally relate to that naive. I'm like, well, let's see what's in store. But learning a lot. Thank you.
Great. Oh, okay. So we have some questions in the chat. Let's see. Let me scroll to the right place. If principal, you put those questions in the chat. I thought there were other questions. Adam says, I think alignment is very important. Having common language helps with misunderstandings, holding people to a high expectation and giving them the opportunities so they can meet them. Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you and what's your job?
Hello, I am currently in the consulting world. I work for a small consulting firm where we work on kind of district reform movements. Me personally, I just finished a project with SEL components. So that was really important. I liked how Amanda mentioned, she didn't explicitly say it, but really mentioning how we need to support people. Especially coming out of the pandemic and realizing that we're all in this together. And then like maybe some of the things and reactions that people have are new, and we have to accept people for where they are and kind of meet them. Kind of relates to that universal design learning overall for our teachers and our support staff, and apply that to the classroom to make sure that our students are meeting the expectations that we're holding them, because we still need to hold them accountable for learning as well.
Thank you.
I want to add maybe a little perspective from the teacher end, which is, always want feedback and want to improve. And I just really like or appreciate the mix of what sometimes can feel very subjective, like when someone comes into your class for 5 minutes and, maybe they come in at that moment when things weren't quite or as organized as you had hoped, and how you can really feel like, hey, you didn't see me at my best. But then if you have another sort of form of data that's maybe a little more objective, like the TeachFX data, it just sort of balances out that sentiment a little bit. And I think it would make me as a teacher feel a little more open to the feedback.
Now, I feel as though I committed the cardinal sin of ignoring family at a gathering here, because Deborah is a member of the TeachFX team. Deborah, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
I'll just say here, so excited to be part of this conversation. So excited to have the opportunities to work with Appoquinimink, as I have over the course of this year. An educator at heart, but I also lead engagement efforts. So you may occasionally get an email from me.
And Deborah has been a fabulous partner for the past 3 years, I guess, in working together to design professional learning. It's been really exciting to work with Deborah. And Becky Poskin, you're also on the call. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Becky. I'm on the partnerships team at TeachFX, former elementary school teacher, and really just nice to hear from all of you. And yeah, what Amanda's been talking about is great in terms of that candid and compassionate feedback, which I think Ashley also just commented on. I really, I think there's a book called Radical Candor. Mm-hmm. Isn't that, yeah. And it's all about, providing feedback in a way that is really kind, but also direct enough so that, as David talked about it, you don't bury it in euphemisms and they miss the whole point. So I think it's an interesting way to think about it.
My very first principal as an assistant principal gave me that book after a few weeks and said, you need to read Radical Candor. And your feedback to teachers right now is too soft and they don't know what you mean. And now they're stressed. And so that, I think that was a turning point for me in my leadership journey to say, okay, I just need to be kind, but more direct. That's one of my first reads.
I'd like to highlight some things that Ashley just put in the chat. And I don't know if you want to expand on it, Ashley. You said right now we're missing some of the timely, candid feedback needed to challenge our teachers and students to grow. I think that's really important. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that.
Sure. Just kind of connecting it back to my comment when we first looked at these questions at the start of the Zoom session here about, how do we move forward from where we are as a result of the pandemic. I know in the state of Delaware, where we are located, evaluations and things have kind of been placed, on pause momentarily. And I'd like to see us getting back to where we were prior to the pandemic and continuing to challenge not only our teachers, but our students as well, so that we continue to see them, grow. Our students have missed out on a lot throughout the pandemic and while remote and virtual, and we don't have a whole lot of time to, make up what we've lost. So continuing to provide candid feedback in a timely manner, I think is crucial for our teachers to continue to grow and be reflective practitioners. I sometimes in the past when I've gotten evaluations, I love to hear all the praise and all the great things, but tell me what I can work on. That's really what I want to know. So when we're not providing that to our staff, I think we're doing them a disservice. So, and I think Amanda had a great point that it's our leaders, our administrators' responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Ashley, you're in the Appoquinimink School District, correct?
I am, yes.
Can you tell us your role?
I'm a work-based learning specialist supporting students with special needs at all of our secondary schools. So that includes our 3 high schools and 4 middle schools.
Oh, wonderful. Glad to know that. I've seen your name in the database and I wondered what your role is.
Ashley's also, she doesn't give herself enough credit. She's also she was a former ED, school administrator, over social studies teacher, leader. So Ashley, got to, add all of that in when we tell us the goodness you do at Appo.
Thank you.
There's a little chat forming right now, a little thread around forward feedback. So Adam or Dr. Wilson, I don't know if either one of you want to expand on the idea of forward feedback and why you like it so much.
So I'm fairly new to it, but I came across it through an educational blog that I found. And so what it is if it kind of takes away that anxiety of getting feedback, because if you already pick what you want feedback on, you kind of have an idea. And even before someone comes in and gives you the feedback, you brainstorm some of the things that will make you successful ahead of time. So when you do get that feedback, you're already aware of certain things that you know what you need to do. So it makes those candid conversations that were mentioned earlier, and you can be a little more compassionate, and it's easier to talk about tweaking something instead of saying, oh, you did this wrong. Like, oh, we talked about how you wanted to use academic vocabulary more. I noticed that, 3 students were using it instead of all of them. How do you think we could increase that? Something like that's a real quick example.
I like the concept simply because, and it's very new to me, but just on the surface, to me, it kind of feeds into my belief that teachers do want feedback. I think it's erroneous to think that because some administrators or because we shy away from those courageous conversations that, there's going to be, just because you're giving feedback, it's going to be this confrontational moment, or it has to be negative. Teachers do want to know how they can grow. And to me, the forward feedback concept just on its surface feeds into, like I said, my assumption that, or my belief that teachers, they want it. And it's a surefire way to do what I think is most important in today's time, you know, as far as educators are concerned, and that's building instructional capacity, just building capacity. So I like it, and I'll definitely be learning more about it.
Dr. Wilson, we didn't get to hear what your role is.
I'm a principal at an elementary school.
All right. I wanted to just briefly go back to a point that Deborah made because I had an interesting experience with a teacher in Detroit this morning. Deborah was talking about how sometimes when an administrator comes into a classroom for an observation, they're only there for a short time and they might see something that doesn't really truly represent the heart of the lesson. And this happened to this Detroit teacher where she said that she was very nervous when her principal came in this morning and she didn't feel like she was on top of her game. She was talking too fast. And she's teaching a very challenging class of math students who are many grade levels behind in middle school. And so she's got a lot of challenges going on. And we talked about how she had an opportunity that if she created a TeachFX class report during that same lesson, then she would be able to talk to the principal about what happened after the principal left. Because she said, you know, as soon as she left, the kids all started talking about how to solve problems and they were helping to teach each other and it was wonderful, but she wasn't there to see it. And so I never thought about this before, but TeachFX class reports can be part of a support for that observation that may have not captured the whole class period. Well, we have just a minute or so left on the slides that Rachel will distribute. We have contact information and we also have that QR code again, where you can take a look at TeachFX for yourself and check out the free trial if you'd like to. And of course, Becky and our whole sales team are always available to you to talk about getting more involved with TeachFX. And it's easy. We're all just our first name, like David, at teachfx.com. I want to thank Amanda. You're so generous with your time and sharing in a transparent way what it's been like for you to be a first-year principal. And I have to say to all of you that Amanda is one of those special people who's really a lot of fun to work with. So it was great to be on the call with you today. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming.